All right, welcome to your first photography week. And I like to start off by starting you guys off with something easy and somewhat familiar. It is a really popular form of photography called food photography. So, in this presentation, I'm going to show you all different kinds of food photography. And this is just kind of an idea board. So, at any point in time, if you see an image and you want to recreate that same thing, go right ahead. I try to mix in photo one examples with photo two examples. I try to mix cell phone examples with DSLR examples. And the whole point being is so you can't really tell because the quality should be about the same. The number one rule that I want you guys to remember this week is I need you to take your photos outside, especially if you are shooting with your cell phone. So, again, I'll repeat that one more time. You need to take your photos outside. Some of you might be asking me why, and the reason being is if you're shooting with a cell phone or you're a beginner photographer, that lighting, that good lighting outside is really going to help you. And if you didn't know this already, shooting on a cloudy day is a little bit easier than a sunny day because you're not dealing with harsh shadows. So if it's sunny outside, go to the shade. If it's cloudy, you're going to have the best lighting scenario, which is called diffuse lighting, and you'll learn that a little later in the course. So as we look at these images, I'm just going to talk through them, and I tend to over talk so that you have a great idea of how these are being shot. So if we look at the image on the left, that is what I would expect a photo two person to be able to do because they have multiple different types of food. They're dealing with different elements, a different composition. So that's a challenging photo that I wouldn't expect a photo one person to be able to do yet. The image on the right, however, is something that anybody could easily do from home. They didn't just take a picture of a muffin, they did something with it and they just found cups and stacked them in an interesting way. What makes this picture look really good is the fact that there's nothing distracting in the background. They actually shot this photo near a window, which is possible. If you're a little more advanced or you're familiar with how to take photos, you can use a window by a table to take your photos. But again, if you're a beginner, just shoot them outside. As we look through these images, I want you to expand the idea of what food photography is. It can be, oranges. It could be something as simple as spices. Pretty much anything that you can consume, I would consider as food. And anything that goes along with food is considered as food as well. So if we look at the image on the left, we have a can of condensed fruit concentrate. They didn't just open it up and take a picture of it, they styled it. So they found some berries from maybe outside, they scooped some out and put it on a spoon to create some really good texture. And one of the most important things that they did was they removed the label. And one of those reasons being is you don't want to be distracted by words or logos or things like that this week. You want to sell me food. I want to see the food, get hungry, they should look tasty. I shouldn't be distracted by labels and words. The image on the right is somewhere in between a photo one and a photo two sample. What works really well for this picture is the texture and the colors that play into this. It's a complex scene. It's shot from overhead, so you might have to stand on a chair or put this scene on the floor and shoot from above, but this has an interesting angle to it. If we look at these examples, you can shoot more than one object. So in the instance of a donut, you can shoot multiple donuts from an interesting angle. One thing that I do want to point out with the donuts is that you probably want to clean up what it's sitting on before you shoot it. I like to use this example because you can use Photoshop to get rid of a lot of these elements and clean up your picture really well. You'll also notice too that they're shooting down with the object. So instead of shooting like normal, you might have to squat or sit on a chair to get this kind of angle. The image on the right is dark and moody. These are my kind of favorite photos, that are the ones that have high contrast. What they did that was interesting at the picture on the right is they didn't just leave the eggs how they were. They opened up the eggs, they cracked them open. It was really interesting how they tried to put some context around that egg and made a little nest. But there are some things that could have been better about the image on the right. They could have gotten this large stick out of that picture. That would have brought the focus a little bit closer together, but this was a nice picture. If you've noticed, a lot of these images have plain backgrounds. And by plain, I mean there's not distracting things in the background. So use a sheet, use a shirt, use a piece of paper, or use maybe a porch to get these nice solid backgrounds. And by solid, it can have texture on it. I just don't want to see distracting things. So if we look at the image on the left, what works really well for this image is its nice, contrasty, poppy colors. You have a dark background with a really gritty textural surface it's sitting on, but you have these bright red chili peppers, and that works really well for this image. The image on the right, however, it's busy. It works. There's some things that I would probably take out, such as this little chippy right here. That's a little distracting. I probably would have gotten rid of the shirt here. So when you add, the more food elements you add, it does add complexity to your image. But you just have to watch out and make sure that you're not making it too complex. One thing I wanted to point out right here is you might see some words. Those are distracting. You can edit those out, or you can place something over it to get rid of it. So you can use things around your house. You are not being forced to go out and buy anything, although if you want to use that as an excuse to go out and get a sweet treat to eat, that's fine. But I want you to be resourceful. So try to find something around your house to take pictures of. So one of the things that I want to advise you against doing are shiny objects in your picture. Shiny objects can be very challenging to shoot because of the glare in photos. If you notice in these photos, these spoons are really roughed up, they're old, they're not shiny. So it works in these instances. But I would try to avoid shiny objects if you're a beginner photographer, just because you're dealing with glare and things like that. This picture has an interesting angle. This is a little more advanced in the fact that you're not dealing with just a honey jar. The honey is actually doing something. The depth of field in here is really interesting. What depth of field is what we can see. So it's a clear foreground, and then the background starts to get blurry. You can do this easily by tapping on the object on your cell phone or adjusting your aperture on your cell phone. You can really play around and get fun and crazy and get your own style when shooting your food photography. You can use kind of any background you want. You just want it solid and you don't want it to mix in with what you're doing. So if, for example, you had a yellow background with these macaroons, it wouldn't work as well as the white. Something else I did want to point out are shadows. You want to make sure that your shadows make sense for your photograph. If you have really harsh shadows, sometimes it takes away from your photograph. You can have people in food photography. However, people should not be emphasized in this week. The food should be emphasized. So the image on the left is a really good example of using a model that's incorporated within your food photography photo. However, your model isn't the star of the show. The strawberries are. If we look at the image on the left, they used a really creative backdrop, just a big old stump, and they have colorful green onions to bring in the overall photo. And they didn't just slap them on the wood, they arranged them in a diagonal form that looks interesting. Here's another simple image on your left. The image on the right isn't that great of an image. I put this one in here to talk about taking pictures in grocery stores and markets. You can totally do that for your food photography assignment. Just make sure your lighting is good, and you might have to move your objects in order to get a good photo. So if you're at the grocery store or if you're at a market, you can still take your food photos. Here's some really good examples of different ways that color was used. One used a white background, and you can kind of see its overall effect is really bright and poppy, as to where the image on the right, they used a dark background, and it creates a more moody picture. Here's some more examples. This time I wanted to show examples of using spices and condiments and things just probably sitting in your fridge or sitting in your cabinets forever that probably need to be thrown out anyways. So what is interesting about these, they didn't just put blobs on a piece of paper, they did something with them. They put them in something to create that context of food photography. Now, food photography, like I said, can expand to natural occurring foods such as carrots growing, or maybe tomatoes in your backyard, or green onions, or hot peppers. You can photograph them as if they were growing in real life. That is okay as well. Talking about food photography, there's always exceptions to the rule, and things don't always have to look delicious. If that's not your style and you don't want to do something bright and colorful and poppy, you could go the opposite direction and look at decay. So maybe you were walking down the street and you saw a piece of food that was decaying and had bugs in it. You can photograph that. But again, you're going to have to manipulate that scene. You might have to pick and choose things that you do to it. So I'm giving this assignment to you early so that you can think about it. And if you wanted to, for example, set out a bunch of grapes outside in the hot sun just to see what would happen as an interesting experiment, you can do that. Here's an example of an exception to a rule where we look at a bunch of different elements of food, and the background is very similar in color. Now, the image on the left does a little bit nicer of a job at capturing all the elements photographed together. The image on the right, there's some things that get lost in translation or look a little weird, such as the melted cheese is a little oversaturated here. I would play around with colors. And again, Photoshop is a wonderful app where you could easily just tap the background and the foreground and maybe desaturate that orange a little bit so that you can see all your objects. One of the things I did want to bring up one more time is your stickers and words and logos. There's a time and a place for that. The image on the left where you have the Pepsi bottle, that looks good. It's not distracting. The image on the right, however, you have stickers that are a little distracting. You have this barcode. You have this little nutritional value thing going on. So when that happens and you're looking at your photos, peel them off, take them off, rotate them, take them out of the picture. Do what you need to do because one logo or word or phrase can really detract from your photo. Here's another example of using a person in your photo, but again, the emphasis is on the food. So if you work in the food industry, this would be a great week for you to do your food photos in. Image on the right is a very simple image. It's styled, it has good composition, it really pops against that black background. Here's another example of a person that is in the context of maybe taking food home. The food is the emphasis, not the person. If you want to get fun with your food, maybe you like to create your own bakery images. These are some really cute little examples of how you can play with food. And then here's an example. There's, again, always exceptions to the rule. So this is an image where you have all of the same color range food images contrasted with the background, and they're all similar. But what makes these images good is we can still see everything, and that's because of its use of texture. Now, before you go out and take your food photos, I wanted to point out what not to do for this week. So I know you probably laugh when you see this photo, but I know at least one of you will do this kind of food photo. You gotta take your images outside. That is the number one rule for this week. If you take your image outside, you will have good lighting. And again, a cloudy day is better than a sunny day. If you're running into harsh shadows because the sun's out, go into the shade. This image here is very rushed. I can tell it's done at nighttime in a dark room. I could probably look at the metadata and see that it was rushed. The hamburger itself is unappetizing. It doesn't look that great. I don't want to eat it. There's a lot of things that I could have done better to this photo, but the main thing here is I need to take it outside. It's just way too dark. This image here is a little bit better. I can still tell that they didn't shoot outside. And the one dead giveaway is it has this yellowish, warm brown, orange tone to it. I know that it's inside lighting when it has this tone. So take your photo outside. I can see where the person is standing because of the shadow right here. And not all food is going to look delicious. So if your mom's cooking a meal and it just doesn't look appetizing, there are still things that you could do to it to recover this photo. So the one thing that I would do is just take the most delicious looking thing and plate it all by itself. So for example, this chicken leg here is probably the most appetizing looking or appearing item. I would put that on a plate by itself, shoot it overhead outside, and you can take this iffy photo and make it a really great photo. Here's another example. This is probably like an average example I would see from a Photo 1 student. They need to tweak it a little. This isn't a bad photo, but it could be so much better. So rule number 1, take your photo outside. You can make this photo into a really good photo. The second thing is when you're taking your photos, you have to start looking with the artist's eye. So I would remove this piece of lettuce really quickly. I would remove these little dead fries here. And if you're taking it outside and doing those small, teeny tiny 30-second fixes, you'll have a great photo. So as we look at our images, I can tell when you guys are rushing and when you are taking your time. So here's an example that looks very rushed. It doesn't look like they styled anything. They didn't listen to me when I said, don't put logos in here because it's distracting. And then one of the things that you guys have to pay attention to are the backgrounds. You can't have distracting things in your background. So remove all that trash, plate your items, style them, pay attention to the composition. And another thing I wanted to mention as well is I know this image, even though it's not very good, this was a stolen image online. And I can tell because there's a little watermark at the bottom of this page that tells me so. This image here is what we call a pixelated image. So what this person forgot to do is they forgot to upload the largest file size. So when you're emailing images to yourself, make sure that you hit original size. Otherwise, you'll end up with a pixelated image like this, and you'd have to redo the assignment and resend it to yourself. So again, just a quick little summary here. It's all about the light this week. The number one tip is you gotta go outside. You gotta take your photos outside. Do not wait until last minute. Do not use a built-in flash. Flashes, those come later on in Photo 2 and Advanced Photo. Second thing, you want to minimize all the clutter. Use plain backgrounds, plain backdrops. You shouldn't have any clutter going on. Remove those things before you take a photo. Good photos don't need a whole lot of editing. And then the last thing here is you want to adjust the white balance in your photos. So make sure that when you're taking your photos, your oranges look orange, your red chili peppers look red. So if you're dealing with colors that shouldn't be there, you can adjust those by editing them in Photoshop or using an app. Or you can simply just play around with the lighting of your settings. So again, if you're shooting outside, you probably won't have these color issues. So that's the end of the slideshow. If there are any questions about what I expect this week, just let me know. Pinterest will help you, and this PowerPoint should help you with coming up with ideas. All right, if you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to email me.